In this video, I want to help demystify tone languages for you, as well as giving practical tips for learning a tone language. So first off, I want to introduce the concept of pitch. Now, if you've done music before, you might be familiar with the concept of pitch, but if you haven't, don't fear, you can still be successful learning a tone language. So pitch is just whether a sound is high or low, or equivalently, whether that sound has faster vibrations or slower vibrations. So the note is relatively higher than the note You can also have a rising pitch or falling pitch So all spoken languages use pitch. One thing that's really interesting about just the way that our bodies are designed is that the consonants and vowels that we produce are essentially independent from the pitch that we produce them on. You can take the same consonants and vowels and combine them with different pitch contours to convey different meanings. Now, one example that I really like about this is two songs, America the Beautiful and the theme song from Gilligan's Island. The thing is that these songs are set up such that you can actually switch the lyrics and the tunes, and they still work. So I really like this example to show how pitch, or in this case the tune of the song, and the actual consonants and vowels are independent from each other. So here's an example of that. Sit right back and you'll hear a tale of a fateful trip. And then here would be the other one. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesty above the fruited plain. Same consonants and vowels, but you can totally switch around what's happening with the pitch. So for when you're singing, that's the notes. When you're speaking, that would be kind of the intonation or tone, depending on the language. So there's two main ways that languages use pitch. So one way is the way that English uses pitch, and that's we use pitch kind of at the level of the entire sentence. We use it to emphasize certain words or to tell whether a sentence is a statement or a question. So for instance, you could take a sentence like, he is marrying her tomorrow. That would be kind of like a relatively neutral declarative. You've got kind of like gradually falling pitch with maybe some slight peaks on some of the main content words at the beginning and end of the sentence. You can raise the pitch at the end to make it a question. He's marrying her tomorrow? You can also manipulate the pitch in other parts of the sentence to emphasize certain words. You could say, he is marrying her tomorrow, or he's marrying her tomorrow, or he's marrying her tomorrow, to kind of emphasize a particular word and to give kind of the idea of like an incredulous question. But in English, the pitch has to do primarily with kind of sentence level communication ideas. Which word you're emphasizing, or whether something's a list or a statement or a question, etc. Now, other languages use tone in a very different way, where tone doesn't belong with the sentence. Where the pitch doesn't go along with the sentence, but where the pitch goes along with particular words, where a particular word will have a particular pitch that goes along with it. A specific word might have a high pitch, and it needs to have that high pitch to mean the same thing. The same consonants and vowels with a low pitch might mean something completely different. Those languages are known as tone languages. When you use pitch kind of at the level of the sentence, like English does, that's called intonation. If you use pitch at the level of particular words, kind of as part of that word, that's called tone. So two different ways to use pitch in language. Some examples of tone languages that you might have heard of would be like Mandarin Chinese or Cantonese or the other Chinese languages, Thai or Vietnamese. Japanese also uses tone, as well as Swedish and Norwegian. There's some maybe languages that is less known that they use tone. As well as there's a lot of languages in Africa. There's Native American languages that use tone. There's languages in South America, languages in Papua New Guinea. A lot of languages. In fact, about half the world's languages use tone in some way or another, kind of using the definition that there's some kind of words or meaningful units that have a particular pitch associated with them, and as a part of that word. Okay, so even though tone seems kind of exotic for a lot of people coming at language learning from a European language or English background, tone languages are actually really common, and they don't have to be as hard or scary as they might seem at first. So one really good thing is that if you're an English speaker, you're already used to using pitch in language. And you can already hear a lot of pitch differences in your language just by virtue of being an English speaker. You can leverage that to help you in any language learning endeavors where you're learning a tone language. So I'm going to give you some examples that can help you kind of bootstrap into a tone language. So in a tone language, the main thing that you're going to be learning isn't how to hear pitch. Maybe in some ways you might not hurt to do some kind of like working on how to explicitly notice which pitch you're hearing. But the main thing is just learning to associate pitch with particular words rather than with the sentence. But here's some examples to kind of help you with that process. We're going to look at some English sentences that also happen to be really short so that they're just one word. Specifically, we're going to look at the word no, spoken kind of in isolation by itself. And we're going to put different intonation contours on that to show you, to kind of help you get the idea of producing a single word with different pitch contours. So in English, no versus no kind of have different kind of like pragmatic meanings, or kind of different meanings about kind of like the context of what we want to convey. Whereas in a tone language, like those might be two completely different words. One might be, pig, and one might be like tomorrow, or something, totally unrelated. Box or elephant. Okay, so here's the English word no with kind of a gradual falling intonation contour. No. No. That's kind of falling. No. It'd be kind of like a question. That would be rising. No. Level. No. No. And a level maybe falling, maybe that one's falling just a little bit at the end, but mostly level. No. No. Be kind of like slight rise. Not as dramatic a rise as the first one. No. That would be a more dramatic fall. So if you're learning a language and you're hear that a certain word has a rising tone or a falling tone, think about kind of the English word no and kind of as a question or as a statement. And that's the contour that you're going for. Now, English is going to be using that contour to communicate different things, but there's a good chance that whatever pitch contours you need to produce in a tone language, you can already produce something similar in English. It just might mean something different in English than the language that you're learning. Now, just a little overview of kind of tone languages and some different ways that they can work. So, some tone languages just have, a high or low, or they just have kind of a binary contrast. That's just like a two-way contrast where a certain syllable has high pitch or it doesn't, has a high tone or it doesn't. Or maybe there's like a high versus low contrast. So for these ones, these languages, you just have the high or low. So you might wonder, well, how can I tell whether a certain syllable is high or low? And the answer is context. Pay attention to the syllables around it. Start listening to, is it high or lower for this particular speaker? You might have a kid speaking this language, and all their highs and all their lows might be higher than, maybe an older male speaker who also has high and low differences, but you might have the kid having all their highs and lows up here, and an adult speaker having all their highs and lows down here. In language, pitch is relative. So you're paying attention to kind of relative to the speaker's overall range and relative especially to the syllables and words around it. And then languages can have kind of increasingly complex systems from there in terms of the number of tones that they have. So you can have just a high tone versus nothing, or high tone versus low. You could have a three-way, like a high, a mid, and a low. You can also have rising and falling tones. Some languages also have kind of rising, falling, like a scoop, or kind of like, so that would be falling, rising. You could also have rising, falling. So you can have kind of those different combinations. Those are called contour tones, where you have not just a level, high or low, but you have kind of some combination, kind of usually on a particular syllable. So some ways that you can get to know this is you can just Google the language if it's a more commonly known language. If it's less common, you might be kind of getting quickly into like academic articles. If it's a more commonly known language, like there might be textbooks that talk about this, or you might find answers just kind of on more general interest sites. One thing, so linguists sometimes, as you get into tone systems, sometimes you'll find that people have different opinions about the number of tones that a particular language has. One person might say a language has 7, another person might say the language has 9. Usually that doesn't make a huge difference for learners. So it seems like it might be really unsettling for learners. Usually those types of debates, a lot of times it's that linguists are agreeing there on kind of the facts and just disagreeing on whether two different tones are variants of each other or not. So just a quick example, you might have, let's just take a real simple language. Let's say that we've got a high and a low. And so we've got ma, and then we've also got ma and ma, like where it's real short. One linguist might say, well, that's 4 different ones, ma, and ma. And then another linguist might say, oh, the short ones are just variants of the long ones. And they might come up with kind of a principle for saying like, oh, well, the short ones, like those ones are short when it comes before another consonant. Or they might kind of come up with some rules for that. So anyway, don't get too bogged down in debates about how many there are. Usually if you read, if you kind of like understand where both are coming from, they're probably coming from similar places, and the technical debates are things that might not affect you very much as a language learner. Similarly, sometimes you see kind of debates about, well, does this language have like 2 tones, or maybe we'll say 2 tones plus a neutral tone, or 3 tones. Again, there are some subtle differences there, but it might not make a huge difference for you as a language learner. Okay, so we can have languages that just have kind of 1 or 2 tones. You can have languages that have more. You can have, I think the record is Bao is a language in Asia that has 5 different level tones. So there's like a low, a mid-low, a mid-high, and a high. And I think maybe there's also some contour tones there too. But here's kind of here's kind of some tips for actually going about learning a tone language. So one thing that really helps me is to just start with listening. It's really hard to say things that you can't hear well yet. So first off, practice listening and see if there's just any part of the tone system that comes easier to you. Maybe there's just a particular word that is just easier for you to hear the tone on. Or maybe there's like a couple different tones, and maybe you can't hear the difference between most of them, but maybe there's 2. Maybe there's like a high level and like a low falling, where you're like, okay, I definitely can hear the difference between those 2. Just find something. Just get a toehold on the system. It can be really amazing how fast you can get from a small toehold to understanding a lot of the system. But getting that toehold is really important. So start off with whatever's easiest for you to hear, whatever contrast you can hear easiest, and start practicing with it. the way that I would recommend practicing it is find some words that are the same except for their tone. Like same consonants, same vowels, just as similar as possible except for their tone. And then start listening to those. Either, if you've got someone who can help you practice, have them say one word and then say the other, and then have them say, pick a word randomly, and you try to guess which word they were saying, whether it was the one with the high tone or the one with the low tone. Practice this. If you don't have as much time with a speaker, or maybe don't have any time with a speaker to practice with, get some recordings. And then you can just quiz yourself. Start with that easiest contrast and work from there into the progressively more difficult contrasts. And once you can start to hear some of those contrasts more reliably, maybe you're at 90% accuracy on kind of identifying which tone it is, start practicing producing it. Try to say, again, use your same set of words, and then go for kind of pick one of those words. Okay, I'm going to say the word with a high tone, and then say it without telling your language helper which one you said, and see it. If you can produce that for a native speaker, see if they can tell which one you said, and get to where you can produce it in a way that people can reliably hear the difference and know which one you meant. And then eventually work on trying to get to where you sound as much like a native speaker as possible. If you don't have a native speaker to practice with, or don't have as much time as you'd like with a speaker of the language to practice with, you can also record yourself for the production bit. So, practice saying the words, and then, maybe record yourself saying the word with a couple different tones, a couple different ways, and then maybe come back the next day and kind of guess which one you said and see if you're guessing correctly. You can kind of test yourself that way. You can do the same test with another language learner, or you can also just record yourself and then listen to compare the recording of yourself with the recording of a native speaker that you got for the first part, and see how close you can make your own pronunciation to the native speaker's pronunciation. If you do have someone to practice with, though, I think it can be a really fun game to practice trying to hear the difference between tone and then trying to produce that difference. This is a game you can use, though, for not just for tone. It works well for tone. You can also use it for any type of sound contrast that you want to work on and improve on. Now, there's one last bit that I want to last bit of information about tone languages and how they work that can be really helpful as a language learner. So far, we've been thinking about tone as kind of a single dimension. That is, we've got, each word has, at any point in time, we've got a higher tone or lower tone. We've just got a single dimension. But in fact, there's a couple other things that you can do, or there's a second dimension that some tone languages exploit. And this is called voice quality, the second dimension. Now, some tone languages use it, some don't. The language that you're using might not use it, in which case you might not have to use it. Some languages that just use voice quality and don't make as much use of pitch. But here it is. So voice quality pitch has to do with kind of in your larynx, in your voice box. You've got some thin flaps of skin that vibrate when the air goes past them. And pitch has to do with how fast they're vibrating. When they vibrate faster, we hear that as high pitch. When they vibrate slower, we hear that as low pitch. You can also manipulate how they vibrate, like how relaxed versus tight the vocal folds are as they're vibrating. And so if you make them really tight, it's what we call creaky voice, or the technical term is laryngalization. So laryngalization, like if you're really creaky, it sounds like this. This is also the same phenomenon known as vocal fry, that you'll hear sometimes people using in English. It's associated especially with the end of sentences or with a Valley Girl accent. Sometimes you'll hear kind of that creakiness occurring. The alternative, kind of on the other end of the spectrum, is breathiness. So breathiness sounds like this. If you're really breathy, sounds like this. So you've got kind of modal phonation, or kind of like normal voicing. You've got on the other side, you've got really creaky phonation. And then on the other side, you've got really breathy phonation. Where phonation just means voice quality, or how the vocal folds are vibrating. So the languages where you'll see this is that languages that have a lot of tonal distinctions tend to also use voice quality together with pitch to make it easier to hear. Earlier we talked about how there's some languages that languages can have as many as 5 different levels of pitch. Low, mid, high, high. And if you're thinking that sounds really hard to distinguish, you're right, it can be really hard to distinguish. So how do languages make that easier for their speakers? There's really 2 ways. One is that a lot of times the higher level tones are actually slightly contoured. Like a high tone might actually raise a little bit, and a low pitch might fall a little bit. So even though it's called a low tone, it might actually have a little bit of a fall, or a high tone might have a little bit of a rise to it that can help you kind of hear the difference between that and other tones. And then the other factor is voice quality, that a lot of times languages will use voice quality. Like a low tone might have some creakiness along with it. A high tone might have some breathiness along with it. So that what at first seemed like just a bunch of kind of different level tones contrasted against each other might actually be, instead of like a low, mid, high, it might be like a low falling with some creakiness, and the high might be, a high rising with some breathiness. And if you can start to listen for those other cues, the contours along with that creakiness or breathiness, that can really make it easier. If your language uses that, it can really make it easier to hear the differences in those. So one place that this shows up is like if you're learning Mandarin Chinese. I use this example because it's a more common language that some of you might be interested in learning. There's kind of 4 different tones, creatively named tones 1, 2, 3, and 4. Tone 2 is a rising tone, and tone 3 is a falling rising tone. And those can sound pretty similar. But one thing to listen for is that tone 3 has some additional creakiness in the middle. So where you've got kind of a straight rise in the second tone, in 3 it kind of sounds kind of broken. You can hear a little bit of that creakiness in the middle. So if you're learning a tone language, my top tips are to, first of all, do some research. Try to learn as much as you can about the tone language from written sources about how the tone system works, because that can really help you. Number 2 is to start practicing. Just start with the easiest tonal distinction you can find, just the easiest part of the system. Start there. Start practicing. Start practicing listening, and start practicing producing it yourself. And you can do that, best case would be if there's a native speaker you can practice with, but you can also do a lot just with recordings. And then my third top tip would be listen, and so this would be looking at the research that you can find, as well, and what people have written about the language, as well as just using your ears and listening to how people are using the language. Listen to voice quality. See, are all the tones using the same voice quality, or are there some that are maybe more creaky and some that are maybe more breathy? Because that can really help you kind of with hearing the difference, as well as you're able to incorporate that into your own speech, making you sound more native-like and making your tones easier for native speakers to produce. Easier for other speakers of the language to be able to understand. So these are some of my top tips for learning a tone language. So I'd love to hear from you about your triumphs and failures with tone languages, hopefully especially the triumphs, as well as if you have any questions for me or any other videos you want. Please reach out and like and subscribe. Thanks so much.